This is Rabbanit Sarna and Rabbi David Wolkenfeld. Shalom and welcome to the Straw Hat. We are the official podcast of Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel Congregation, an Orthodox synagogue in the beautiful Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. This week's episode is basically just one long segment about being a shul without walls and what it means to be a shul where we can't come together in person, what that's meant for our shul in terms of even what a shul is and what its mission is. And also in terms of what it means for our homes. So I hope you enjoy the episode.
So tell me when we are recording this. What is the date today?
So when we're recording this is Sunday, April 26th.
And why is that significant?
That is significant because this episode is not going to drop for about a week and a half from now, which is very unusual for us because we normally record podcast episodes like maybe a day or two on a good week before they're supposed to go out into the world.
And are we doing this because Haley wants more time to edit?
We're doing this because by the time this episode is supposed to drop, I could be on maternity leave.
The Shah Tova, that is super exciting. So we did want to take advantage of our final days of having you as a full staff member before this maternity leave break and take advantage of your Torah insight and podcasting prowess. And so that's why we're recording this now. It'll drop again in a week from Wednesday. And, may very well be another member of your household at the time when this podcast is edited and released to the public, but we're recording now. So this is like a voice from the past when you hear it.
Yeah, totally. We're, it's crazy times.
Crazy times. That's a good segue. We are in crazy times. I think unprecedented times. That's like a cliche that I hear a lot. It's quote unquote the new normal. That's another cliche that I hear a lot. And I think, it's appropriate to devote a chunk of time for the podcast to kind of just explore what that really means for our shul community and for shuls in general as just that one, like shuls being like one very important facet of Jewish life and how shuls are operating, what the mission of shuls has pivoted towards when our normal way of functioning is not available to us.
Yeah. It's funny just when we talk about these like unprecedented times. So Ethan and I are both blessed with kind of like elder matriarchs in our family who are still alive. So his Bubby is 96 and I have a great aunt who's 99. And we've kind of asked both of them, like, do you remember anything like this? And these are people who, remember a lot of things happening in the world. And they're both sort of like, no, this is really different. It's not just, oh, you youngins who like have never faced hardship before. Like this is actually different. So that was kind of, in some ways, interesting to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start. Let's just go. What shuls have no walls anymore? Shul buildings are shuttered all across the United States. I think this past Shabbat there was not a single jurisdiction in which it was legal for shuls to be open and to operate. Israel is now slowly allowing some type of tefillah b'tzibor, but I think not indoors, only outdoors with very limited size and scope of how that can happen. So shuls as an institution, as like a cornerstone of Jewish life, at least in this country, can't operate in their normal way. They're not, our shul, Anshe Shalom, we had minyan 3 times every day, and we had shiurim in the building, and daf yomi, and social events, and kiddush, and children's events, programming, and that's been impossible now for 6 weeks, and it could be another period of weeks or even months until that type of, or longer actually, until that type of shul functioning is possible. But I believe very strongly that the building is shuttered, but the shul is continuing, and I think the shul is more needed than ever. The mission of the shul is just as relevant, if not more relevant than ever before. We just had to pivot towards areas where we're able to operate and where the need has emerged in place of our normal way of doing things. Some of those normal way of doing things have existed for, like centuries, like minyan every day. Like that's a pretty old way of Jewish communal life, Jewish religious life maintaining itself. And we've had to do without that for a long time.
Yeah. So I think it makes sense to kind of focus in on something you said, which is the mission of the shul endures So if your sense of what is the mission of the shul, like you could have a very limited or narrow sense of the point of shul. So meaning if your vision of the point of shul is the point of shul is to do things that require a minyan, and like the physical space of shul is where that minyan gathers. And therefore, if you don't have the physical space of shul, then there is no point in shul because shul is exclusively about things that require a minyan, right? So that's like there is a vision of a shul that's what it is. So why is that wrong? Like, why is that not what our shul is?
I think I've been to shuls like that. Maybe in Israel there are shuls like that. It's sort of a building where minyanim take place throughout the day, but nothing else. The maintenance of Jewish life is handled by other institutions and other places, other spaces, some of them by the government, some of them by other private institutions. But the shul is a physical location where minyanim take place. A shul, and I think a shul of that kind, if it shuttered, I think would have very little need for. Maybe that's a caricature. I don't know. But if that's like as a paradigm, or at least as an archetype, a shul of that kind really wouldn't have much of a need to, you can put the building in mothballs and check back in 6 weeks and see what, and try to get things started again. But a more expansive understanding of what a shul is about very much leaves one with a mission that is quite relevant and quite needed and crucial during a time like this. So, for example, if the shul is an institution that is promoting and encouraging and facilitating and catalyzing Torah and mitzvot, the study of Torah, the embrace of Torah, and the performance of mitzvot of religious ritual, and mitzvot of care and concern and looking out for one another, then that mission is so much needed at a time of crisis. The shul becomes really a counter-cyclical institution where when things are really hard, that's when the shul has to step forward. That's when people need the most care. That's when those interpersonal mitzvot are the most like the number of them, increase. We need to bury the dead, comfort mourners, feed the hungry, help people find work when they're out of work, etc. All of those interpersonal mitzvot are so relevant and crucial. And the religious mitzvot, the ritual mitzvot, I think are also right. I mean, they don't get a break from having mitzvah obligations. Shabbos still comes, Pesach still came, Tefillah is still an obligation each day, even when the shul isn't there. And I think that actually puts a greater burden on the shul to make those mitzvot accessible and to facilitate them in a, I guess, the less efficient way. Like if everyone comes to one building at the same time, it's really, really easy, for me, for example, to, tell people, okay, take your lulav and etrog, okay, hold the etrog, with the pitom face down as you say the bracha. And I can say that in shul on Sukkot morning, and there could be 100 people in the room and they're all learning how to do that mitzvah at the same time, right? And it only takes 30 seconds of my instruction. If people can't come to the shul to learn how to do a mitzvah, then we have to really think as the staff of the shul, as a religious leadership team, how do we educate and facilitate the observance of that mitzvah? It's just the first one that popped into my head, but really every mitzvah, how do we facilitate its performance when we don't have everyone coming to the same place at the same time to do it together and learn how to do it together?
I just want to highlight some of the things that you said, because that was, well, you just said so many things and they were all really great. And just to the what is the point of shul, right? So shul as a seat of, or as like the local seat of Torah and mitzvot, and that you might think that which mitzvot are we talking about? We're talking explicitly or specifically about mitzvot that involve more than one person, meaning so in any mitzvah that like you do on your own, the shul is not actually involved in. And you just said, that like you could see that, and what are the communal mitzvot that the shul facilitates? They're much more expansive than just minyan. It's about comforting mourners and feeding the hungry, and that's what you kind of got at with this idea that shuls are counter-cyclical, that when things are harder for the community, then the shul is even more necessary in order to provide a focus for and to facilitate the doing of those interpersonal mitzvot. But then you said, you might have thought, it's just about interpersonal mitzvot. It's actually not, because the shul also facilitates and educates about even individual mitzvot, right? Lulav and etrog is not a communal mitzvah, but the shul as a place of both Torah and mitzvot maybe, and as a place that's like a source of Jewish education for the whole community, it then has a really strong role to play in terms of even the individual mitzvah performance of our membership.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we saw that in a very strong way in Pesach. I think we've spoken about that on the podcast before. And, a lot of emails went out about that. That was that was the first ritual mitzvah challenge that the shul had to face, and every shul in the world had to face, right? How do we facilitate and educate and support our community facing a whole series of significant but not always easy mitzvot that came upon us right after our buildings closed down, and we weren't able to support these mitzvot in the ways that we had done in the past. And there'll be other examples, I think there are daily examples of tefillah and Shabbat observance, and there'll be other examples as the calendar continues to cycle through the days and the months of facilitating ritual mitzvot that become, and that's also true in not just in the calendar, also in life cycles, right? I mean, we've had to, as a community, learn how to do funerals and shiva over Zoom, and there are people who are figuring out how to do weddings over Zoom, and bar mitzvah, right? I mean, these are all
and baby namings.
Namings, yeah, yes, exactly. For example, right? People are thinking about these questions, and that's the task of the shul, to facilitate that, and to the thought leadership and the practical implementation and the facilitation education. That's all core towards the shul.
And just one other piece that bears naming explicitly is people's spiritual well-being. So you might say, right, like, oh, these gatherings we've been holding for Havdalah or for Kabbalat Shabbat, like really, they're not necessary. Like they don't fulfill a mitzvah. I mean, Havdalah, you in your own home are fulfilling that mitzvah. Being on Zoom while you're doing it doesn't fulfill a mitzvah for you. But we're also holding like a spiritual space too, by coming together, by doing those things, by the daily Mishnah learning and in the memory of people who can't be saying Kaddish right now. I think that's a really important kind of spiritual role that the shul plays in people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that mission continues as well.
For sure. Like commemorating our dearly departed is certainly a core spiritual need and a psychological need, and we've had to find a different way to do that, and I think it's worked for those who availed themselves of that option. Absolutely. There's an idea that I heard shared around a lot when the shuls first closed in March, that the synagogue itself, from some understandings, is the Mikdash Ma'at. It's like the miniature temple, the miniature base of Mikdash, and so the home is like a Mikdash Ma'at. Okay, we are doing rituals at home in place of being able to do them in shul, which is then itself in place of doing it in the base of Mikdash. So it's like two steps removed. We're kind of mourning that loss of our shuls, and the shul itself, we're mourning the loss of the Beit Mikdash. But in fact, the home
always kind of plays that role in a small way, or in a certain way.
Yes, but the home is also directly a parallel to the base of Mikdash. The Talmud says, like, Shulchano Shel Adam, right? The person's table is like a mizbeach, is like the altar in the temple. So in that perspective, the home is maybe a little bit more direct and less derivative as a location for avodah, for serving God. Sam Shmuel Hirsch kind of famously wrote that if he could, he would close every synagogue in Germany where he lived and taught, because he felt people had adopted this mistaken perspective that Judaism was something that only happened in the synagogue. People had outsourced their connection to Torah and mitzvot and to God, even, to something that happened in this building once a week, rather than something that was really that they're meant to live with at all times and all places, and especially to perpetuate and to preserve and to cultivate in their own homes.
And there's a whole movement around this now, like the Beis Hillel movement, for example, is really grounded in these kinds of ideas about home-based Judaism. Moishe houses are really grounded in that. I mean, it's kind of funny because even with this whole idea of home-based Judaism, it's still someone else's home that now you can't go to, meaning like bases are still running all their programs over Zoom too.
Right. So now it used to be someone else's home, and now it's our own homes. But I think people are connecting to home rituals. So I know that's something you've come to appreciate. And so, what is home Judaism? What has it meant for you in these 6 weeks since the shuls have been shut? And I just, I think most people listening can understand that. But just to make explicit, like when Shul had been open, the last Shabbat that Shul was open, Shabbat was a pretty a day obviously without malacha, but a day with a lot of professional responsibilities for you, right? A day that began very early in the morning and continued with professional responsibilities and being very much on and responsive and responsible for, I think, for the vast majority of your waking hours on Shabbat.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
But
what
even
Shabbat?
then,
Mm-hmm.
but even with all that, meaning Shul, like even before I was a synagogue professional, Shul still kind of dominated my Shabbat life from when I was a kid. Meaning, like Shabbat day, I was going to Hashkama and then working in the youth groups, and then coming back from Mincha Maariv, since I was in middle school. So that's a day that's pretty dominated by Shul, even long before,
Yeah.
I was a synagogue professional. And so even to compare what my Shabbat looks like now to then is like really, in my former lay self, But what's interesting, like one of the things I've been wondering about is whether other people have really settled into routines with it. I feel that Ethan and I really, really have, and in ways that are very beautiful and that we never really did before. Like, we, wake up, whatever, daven shacharis, and then before we daven musaf, we sit down and we lean through the parsha, and we stop, like, you switching off aliyut, and then when someone has like a question, like, oh, like what's happening here? Like, what does this word mean? Or why is it in this binyan and not some other binyan? Or, why is this part here, instead of somewhere else? We like stop and we read commentary and we talk about it, and then we keep going and learning like that for hours. Really, most Shabbatot obviously is such a privilege, in so many ways, but has been lovely. But then in my head, it's like, well, am I ready to give this up when we go back to Shul?
That does sound really lovely. I saw online the writer and scholar Jedediah Purdy. He said, seeing people without children writing about, which movie should I watch next on quarantine. He said it's like reading like diaries from the summer before World War I started, that he kind of reads back.
Yeah, everyone said like, oh, if there are COVID babies, they're all going to be firstborns. That's been like the other.
Yeah, there are people who, yeah, and look, everything is hard and challenging and wonderful and in different ways for every different person's perspective. So I would say very, very long, detailed, like scholarly study of the Parsha or anything else is not a feature of Shabbat in lockdown, but moments of quality time with our children, it has become something really, really special. I think Shabbat for, I guess my entire professional life has been a day when my family takes a second seat to my professional responsibilities. And that's been like the biggest shift. Now Shabbat is the day when, I'm not reading emails. I'm really, very, very few professional or no professional responsibilities on Shabbat itself. And I'm available to be with my family in a way that has not been possible really since I was a parent, or I guess I was already a parent before I started working full time, but that was a very, very long time ago. So that's been delightful. And
do you feel like you've established new rituals around that freedom?
Like, there hasn't been quite enough weeks to like establish rituals like new rituals, but like we sing that with like this, like more than once we've sang a lot of like, like slow shira at Shalosh Shidduchos time, and as Shabbat is ending with a bunch of kids. That's been really nice. So like a lot more singing around the house. That's been really nice. And walks to visit the Nettle Horse chickens. That's been like, I think every day has included one or two visits to the Nettle Horse chickens. That's like the highlight of our son Yonatan's life. I think that's sort of, please hope for him one day that his horizons will expand beyond Aldine Street. But for now, that's about as far as we go with it. Some construction sites by the new Red Line upgrades. That's also kind of fun to see for him. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that's been interesting to me is what are the permanent sort of repercussions of this? Kind of at the beginning, everyone was like, oh my gosh, everyone's going to realize that like nothing needs to happen in person, and like shuls are just going to all be moved to Zoom permanently, and everyone's just going to stay home in their like comfortable houses all the time. That seems to me completely wrong. And if anything, what this has revealed is that social media and phones and texting and Zoom are all kind kind of useful, important tools that we're so grateful for in this time, but nothing comes close to being in person with people.
Yeah. I'll say something that I hope to keep and preserve when we're able to relax some of these distancing measures is that there've been a group of folks in the community who have stopped by our home on Shabbat and Yom Tov afternoons. They knock on the door, we open the door, we stand 10 feet apart, and we chat for a while. And it's been just incredibly wonderful and fun, and a highlight of our afternoon when it happens. And also, it's like really, really hard that like we can't invite them in for some tea or some cookies or something, which is what we'd love to do. And sort of tried to make like an informal pledge that when this all ends, that we'll please continue to come back to us, and we'll invite you in, and we'll serve you tea and cookies, and continue. And I hope that that's something that we'll be able to like do more consistently. Just have an open home on Shabbat and Yom Tov afternoons for people to drop by and have some dessert and some tea. That's something that. I guess before we moved to Chicago, we used to people used to drop by. We lived on campus. Like we often had guests for lunch, but then we would invite almost everyone to come by after lunch for dessert, and that was like a really fun part of our Shabbat afternoon. That we sort of haven't established that here. That it seemed people were a little bit had other commitments at that time of the day, and so it didn't take off. But I hope that we'll be able to establish that, because it's really great to see people in the afternoon, and it's just even better when they can come into your house and you can offer them like real hospitality.
Yeah, that's been one of the things. I think we might have mentioned this in the previous podcast, but like, I don't even know how to not have like the non-hospitable nature of these Shabbatot and Yom Tovim has been like really hard for me. One way is in terms of cooking. Like, how do I cook for just two people? What is that? I hate it. And two is, right, like people have been stopping by us too, and it's lovely and it's so fun and it's good to talk to people and catch up and just be around people in person, even if we're, many feet away from each other. But at the same time, it's like, oh, you're cold. Well, I have this nice warm house behind me that I can't invite you into.
Yeah.
Another
thing that I hope to take with us when this ends is the use of technology to make things more accessible for people who can't be physically present because of all sorts of legitimate reasons. But I hope one day we'll have Daf Yomi again in the shul, right? Sitting around the table with cups of coffee all together. But also we can still broadcast over Zoom, right? There's no reason why we can't be in person and also be broadcasting to people. And I think the reason why I didn't do it because I felt, there's so many like audio Daf Yomi like classes, like so many really great ones by like taught by like stellar scholars and really effective educators. Why would I add, my own voice to that? But the reason too is there are people who are connected to our community who know me and know our chevra, and they would join our Daf Yomi, and they have been since we've been switching to Zoom, and that should continue in perpetuity. There's really no reason why that should end. So I hope we'll always think about using technology to increase accessibility and to increase our reach, and to have alumni continue to feel connected to the shul even if they've moved away. But of course, really, really looking forward to restoring the intimacy of actual physical proximity once that's safe.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just like to summarize this point that we've been trying to talk around is that on the one hand, like everything shifting into home away from shul is like weird and disorienting and challenging, and we miss being around people. And on the other hand, it's been this opportunity to kind of invest in the religious lives of our homes as either a mikdash ma'at ma'at, as a like a memory of what could be at Shul, which I think I was kind of getting at with like, well, we do the leaning together and all of that, or just to reinvigorate the mikdash ma'at that is meant to be the home, and that's meant to be the table, and that's meant to be the hospitality, and that's meant to be all of the rituals that we're always doing at home, and the spirituality that our homes are supposed to be imbued with. And I can't help think just on this last part that there's a certain like gender element to that. Like there's been a lot of discussion kind of like on the internet, like, oh, can't go to Minyan, like welcome to being a Jewish woman, which for me obviously doesn't resonate because I've been going to Minyan my entire like Jewish adult life. But I do think that as like Jewish women kind of professionalized, right? Like your job was no longer imbibe your home with spirituality. Your job was work at a bank or be a surgeon or whatever it was. Like there's no one's like professional at the home or orientation is like the Judaism of my home. That kind of became like everyone in the home's job or nobody in the home's job in a certain way. And there's a sort of like moment now to reinvigorate like the Jewish home that I think is full of possibility in a feminist world, in a world where like that's not women's work, that's everyone's work. And people haven't, or some people I'm sure have, but like many people haven't taken the time to kind of really invest in that, and now we're kind of forced to. And there's a certain gift involved in that.
Absolutely.
So anyways, can't wait till we can go back to Shul, obviously, but lots to kind of think about in terms of what Judaism means today and what Shul means today, and how we can reinvest in our homes and in our Shul and in our Shul's mission, and the parts of that mission that don't just involve gathering together in person, and in gaining a deeper understanding of like what our Shul means to us, what our community means to us, and how we can double down on those things, especially when times are hard.
Yep.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of The Straw Hat. Thank you so much to our producer, Haley Leventhal, for all the hard work she puts into making these episodes happen. If you loved what you heard, then we would love to hear from you. Send us an email or a voice message or a text, and we would love to hear what you have to say. And if you didn't love what you heard, then you should build that into your home ritual and keep that in your home. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week.